Welcome to Green and Gold FC.
Australia have done it! From right the Matildas into history. Cue the party! The best team of the A-League era. There it goes. Final! It's a save that means the world to Australia.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Green and Gold FC podcast. We have another interesting podcast for you today, and I'm definitely looking forward to the discussion after last week. I'm once again joined by Alex and Graham. Alex, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you, Ahmed. Happy to be back on and very happy with the success on the first episode, and I'm looking forward to another good one today.
Sounds good. Graham, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a nice long week of football, overseas Aussies and A-Leagues, and looking forward to discussing it.
Yeah, we've got an interesting podcast today with quite a few topics where we're going to focus on like the under-20 squad announced for the Asia Cup and just a few little other things in regards to youth football in Australia. But before we get into the topics, see, I think I was too excited last week and I just wanted to jump straight into the topics. I didn't really get to the podcast and who we are. So let's just go into a brief overview. For anyone who may remember, for a long time, there was a football magazine called 442. Now, along with the print magazine, there was an online forum, which was the hub for all things football, and particularly Australian football. As with all things in business, eventually 442 was bought by Inside Sport. The forum lived, but for whatever reason, Inside Sport made decisions which eventually meant the forum also kind of took a bit of a dive. And there's no real feeling there. It's just the way things are. But out of the ashes of 442 Forum, or the Inside Sport forums, Green and Gold FC Forums was born. And it's from there where the podcast has come about. So I'm sure I can talk about our credentials for all of us, and we'll have a bit of time to quickly do that. But the key part of what we are, all three of us particularly, we are massive football fans with an invested heavy interest in the success and the running of Australian football. So we want the sport to be successful and we want football to succeed. And most importantly, what we are is to keep that conversation going, bring about all the ideas, the thoughts, and the views of the fans to the forefront. So we football fans discussing all things Australian football, from Socceroos, Matildas, MPL, old NSL, the A-League, and we're discussing it for football fans. So, Graham, did you want to quickly run through?
Yeah, so I'm from Cairns, Queensland, Australia, and I'm a theoretical physicist of all things. I work at the University of Southampton. And I am a mad Socceroos fan. I love all things Australian football for many, many years. I really loved 442 as a forum and now Green and Gold FC as a forum, just because it was the one place where you can get the perspectives of the old guard as well as the new dawners in the same place and just hear everyone's perspective. Because I grew up in Cairns, which is a way away from everything. And I could only really find out about the domestic league and the Socceroos basically when it all moved to Fox Sports. And I was just amazed at all the divisions in the game and wanting to hear about our complex history and platform all the different diverse voices of that history in this podcast.
Yeah, sounds good. Alex, you heavily invested in Perth. I'm guessing Perth Glory fan. What else?
Yeah, look, well, I've been a Perth Glory fan for pretty much all my life. My dad used to take me to the games, but I've been watching them for a long, long time. And to be honest, it's a bit disappointing to see how the Perth Glory and especially football all over WA has progressed or sort of, I guess, regressed in the last few years. But look, definitely a heavy involvement in the Socceroos. I do YouTube content around Australia and the A-League and the Socceroos and everything like that. So definitely football mad and very happy that I guess there's finally a place where we're going to be able to discuss everything going on in Australian football and sort of give our thoughts on it.
Yeah, sounds good. And then just a quick one on me. I can't say I've been a lifelong Brisbane Roar fan, but I have, having moved to Australia when I was 15. So my football started with the English Premier League, but definitely a Brisbane Roar fan. I was a football journalist for about 10 years, working in Australia with 442 and Sporting Journal, and to some degree the Courier Mail, a few other things in a freelance capacity. Went to the UK, covered a lot of the Yorkshire leagues before covering the Premier League, Championship, World Cups, even Olympics. Spent a bit of time also working with Manchester United in their documentary and MUTV department, some of the match day programs as well. And then eventually decided that journalism was not for me after 10 years and switched to teaching and coaching. And I'm a C licensed coach, having coached with some of the youth teams in the MPL and also with our academy at school. Let's jump straight in, boys. Trevor Morgan announced his squad for the Under-20 Asian Cup. We're going to go through the squad. We're going to break it down. I'm going to break it down positions. So let's look at the goalkeepers. Stephen Hall from Brighton, Gus Hoofsloot, Sydney FC, Alexander Robinson from MacArthur. Alex, I know in just normal conversations amongst ourselves, you've mentioned you probably would have liked to have seen maybe one or two others, but not overly frustrated with the choices there.
I'm not surprised that we didn't see the likes of Parage Cullen and all of those sort of lads. Look, Stephen Hall's a good keeper. We've known that for the last few years when he was sort of coming through the Adelaide Academy and Brighton had taken a punt on him. And from what I've heard from people over there, he's actually been quite all right. So I'm happy to see him sort of getting that attention and most likely taking up that starting spot. Look, with all the people saying that they're worried about Parage Cullen not being involved and, this and that, when you go into these international tournaments, you only do really need the one big keeper. You need a decent backup, of course, but I'm not too worried about the fact that Hoofsloot and Alexander Robinson aren't really, next level. Stephen Hall is going to be fine. I do think I would have rather have seen Parage Cullen as our starting keeper. I would have felt more comfortable with that personally, but I think he's a great keeper and hopefully he should do well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think Parage Cullen is probably our best. Maybe Pavlicic is probably pretty high level as well. But unfortunately, these tournaments, you don't always get clubs releasing players, and we don't know what negotiations are going on behind the scenes. Obviously, it's a different story if Morgan thinks that this is our best keeper, because of course, Parage Cullen's playing week in, week out and really, really catching my eye. But we have to just assume that this is what's happening. And Stephen Hall's going to do a great job, I think. When I've seen him for the Olyroos in his appearances, I thought he was actually the best on field for us. And that was often in performances where our outfields were doing pretty well too. So he's a pretty exciting keeper, even though he's probably in the academy side over in the Premier League rather than even a backup keeper. But still, I think there's a lot of promise there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Alex, in the sense that you really only need one good keeper, because keepers don't generally tend to get injured too often. So as long as you can have that one good keeper and they can see them through to the whole tournament, you kind of find you're kind of going, okay, I know the backups are not going to be horrible, but they can do the job when they're called upon. But it is interesting, like Pavlicic, he was part of Bayern Munich's friendlies at the beginning of the season. He got a call up to the first team in December or November last year as well, albeit on the bench. Surely you'd think Australia are pushing to have their best in every position, even if it's the backup, because you want healthy competition to be pushing the players.
Look, yeah, it's a tough one to sort of say that. I think a big part of, especially the fact that Parage Cullen and even Pavlicic didn't get called up is obviously just down to the clubs. Pavlicic isn't playing professional football at the moment. He's playing in the 4th division of Germany with the Bayern Munich 2 side. So I guess you can make the argument that they're pushing for promotion. Parage Cullen obviously starting week in, week out in the A-League. I know a lot of other teams have released their players, so it's a bit annoying that the Mariners haven't followed suit, but you can't really blame these clubs. They're in a critical point of the season, and overall, it is a youth international tournament, so maybe doesn't hold that sort of high importance. And if anything, I genuinely believe that maybe Pavlicic or Parage Cullen would have been told that they wouldn't have been first choice and maybe just didn't see a point in coming along.
That's fair. But then, Graham, if you're looking at Stephen Hall, he's only just recently moved to Brighton. So you can't really say that he's tearing it up in Brighton, can you? Elections based on what he's done with Adelaide United, Jordan.
Well, probably with the Olyroos as well and his reputation and training. From watching the players, my personal opinion is I think Parage Cullen is number one. So I really hope that, there is a story here about clubs not releasing players or something, or thinking it's better for their development. We do need to qualify. We qualify so rarely for Youth World Cups these days. So I wish we had our best team, but it's not an outrageous drop to Stephen Hall, because I was impressed with his Olyroos performances.
Yeah, I think from what I'm hearing, it's we're not too overly annoyed with selections in the goalkeeping positions. We're happy Stephen Hall can do the job, but potentially there's some clubs are going, we're not going to release players now at this stage of the season. It's interesting if it's the Central Coast Mariners, considering they're 10th in the league. But I guess what are we? It's like a 6-team finals again. Keeps changing. So they're not. I guess they're still within a chance of making that finals, but realistically, you're kind of going, how serious is it? Let's move on to the defenders now. Just a bit of a disclaimer. Positions have been based on what I've seen on the FA website and not on Wikipedia or anywhere else. So if anyone wants to question them, take it up with the FA. But defenders, we've got Daniel Benny at QPR, Sebastian Esposito, Lecce, Lucas Harrington, Brisbane Roar, Joshua and Sarah, Melbourne Victory, Panagiotis Kikianis, Adelaide United, Zach Lisayalski, Perth Glory, and Fabian Taladera with Adelaide United. Alex, who's our starters there? How are we setting up in the defense?
There's a couple of notable omissions. Dylan Leonard, a massive one, obviously. Franco Lino obviously had an injury he's coming back from, so I can see why they didn't want to pick him. But in all honesty, I do think our strongest back four out of that lot, I don't expect Benny to play in the back line at all. If I had to have a guess, I'd say we'd rock a formation similar to a 4-2-3-1. So that means that I don't believe Benny will get anywhere near that defense, given that he plays as a wing back for QPR, not necessarily a fullback. So if I had to guess, our starting centre-back pairing would be Kikianis and Sebastian Esposito. Right back would be Insera, and our left back to start would be Lizalaiski. Taladera provides good cover. Naturally, a CDM / left back by trade. He can play either, has done for Adelaide. And Harrington, I think, has got a lot of potential, so I'm excited to see him brought along to the squad. Don't think he'll get many starts, but I think he can complement either Kikianis or Esposito quite well. So it'll be interesting to see what the sort of thought is, considering that Esposito is a standout for Lecce's Primavera team, but hasn't played professional football, whereas Harrington's been starting for the worst team in the A-League. So it's a bit of a toss-up, but overall, I think a pretty good defense.
Yeah, it would have been brilliant to have Leonard, because that would be a really strong centre-back pairing in Kikianis and Leonard. Two centre-backs which are well above average at A-League level. Left back, obviously you can tell me more about, because he's a Perth Glory lad. I'm a little concerned that we're a bit skinny at right back. We're missing De Jesus, who would be the obvious omission here. He's been starting for Sydney FC. I get that Sydney FC just sold Hayden Matthews and have had some issues at the back. But here's one of the things where I really wish the national team was put first. He's probably our best option there, and this is this position looks really thin. I hope that Insera is going to surprise me. He hasn't been playing for Melbourne Victory. I think he's had 2 minutes this season. The other omission, Marcus Eunice, played right back, and he's available, but presumably his club didn't release him. PSV2, they're not really facing promotion or relegation. They're the lower end of the table, but they're probably safe from both. And they can't get promoted anyway, so I would like to see him released and play right back. He played right back last night, incidentally. So yeah, I'm not sure what you guys think about the fullback situation, which has me a bit worried. You obviously know a little bit more about Zach Lissalaiski. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. And the omission of De Jesus or Eunice, someone who's playing regularly.
Alex, what can we expect from Lisayalski?
Yeah, I'm hoping Zach can provide a lot of sort of physical ability. He's a centre-back by trade. He came up playing as a centre-back for the Australian youth teams, as well as Western United. That's where he sort of made his A-League debut as centre-back for Western United. Left foot, very tall, very capable, has a real natural knack for sort of just getting forward and finding good space. Has some crazy shot power. Managed to give Hiroki Saka a concussion with a long shot. But look, he is an absolute beast. He's confident, very strong, a decent one-on-one defender, maybe sometimes gets, caught in the wrong areas, but he's only 19 years of age. He's playing a new position for the first time in his pro career. So, it's not too much that you can sort of shame him for. I think he's had a really good season so far, and yeah, I'm expecting him to be the starting left back, and hopefully he's going to do pretty well.
It's easy to talk about like players who are missing and players that we probably would have liked to have seen there. And like we said with the goalkeepers, we don't know why certain players have been omitted or why they're not been selected. Could be because clubs have not released them or refusing to release them, or whatever the reasons may be. Maybe it's just the coach has decided on a certain formation and what he wants to do. So it's always the case with football. We all have an opinion, but like looking at what is picked, there's probably more like what can we then expect to see. So you mentioned probably playing 4 at the back. Are we going to see the right back and the left back sort of darting down the side?
Could be 3 at the back, right? If Benny's a wing back, that solves the right back problem.
I don't imagine it would be a 3 at the back, just because, look, it makes sense on paper, but then when you really look at it, if you want to have a left wing back, you're probably looking at someone like Taladera filling that role. I don't know if I'd be comfortable with it personally. Like, maybe you can make it work. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I'm just saying if that was the sort of thing that they were going for, they definitely could have made some smarter picks. I reckon this squad looks to me like a 4-2-3-1. They've picked one too many wingers and one too many strikers for my liking. I would have rather put maybe an extra fullback. And if you did want to at some point transition to a 3-4-3 in the middle of a game, I maybe would have picked more of a designated wing back as well, especially on the left-hand side, whoever that may be. But look, I think it's an okay squad. There's some good depth. It's just maybe a bit of depth in the wrong areas and, maybe a lack of a clear sort of plan in terms of attacking football. But I think it's a good squad. The midfield, though, is where I'm really excited.
Yeah, let's look at that midfield. We've got Lucas Agosti from Perugia, Alexander Badalato, Western Sydney Wanderers, Adam Bugarija, Perth Glory, Franz Deli MacArthur, Paul Ocon Engsler from Benfica, Jalen Perman from Perth Glory, Oliver Randazzo from MacArthur, Johnny Yule from Adelaide United. Graham, I know you've often spoken highly of Paul Ocon Jr.
Yeah, so he's a player who has the ruggedness and defensive starch to play as a sole pivot, but also the technique to control that first pass and break that first line. So he allows you to play two number 10s if we're chasing the game or if we want to put more pressure on a defensive team. When I saw him for the Olyroos, he looked roughly as good as Nieuwenhof and Yazbek and the other players we had playing as a pivot. And he's 4 years younger. So if he's looking just as good and 4 years younger, that speaks well. He started last night for Benfica B in second division of Portugal. So he's maybe starting to break through at that level, which is a perfectly fine level for his age. And he lets you play probably Yule and Pearman in front of him. Bodolado I think has looked amazing at times, but unfortunately has not had that consistent run of games at A-League level. But I think probably we are looking at Paul Ocon, Jalen Pearman, and Johnny Yule as a front three. Johnny Yule can play as a second pivot if we need to, a bit more defensive starch or a box-to-box midfielder, or can join as a second number 10 if needed.
Alex, you were saying 4-2-3-1. If those three are playing the front three, who's playing in that role of the two between the midfield and the defense?
Going to be Johnny Yule and Paul Ocon Jr. Now, I agree with what Graham's saying in terms of Johnny Yule provides a lot of really good versatility. Paul Ocon Jr. is good enough to play in a single pivot for the youth national teams. But I just feel like I'd rather a bit more defensive stability there. Johnny Yule, look, he has been playing as a 10 most recently at Adelaide, but he does provide a lot of really good quality as sort of an 8. So I think I'd rather maybe him sitting a little bit deeper, especially because, look, with guys like Zach Lizalaski and Sarah, they're not phenomenal overlapping, attacking fullbacks. So you can expect that there's going to be a real emphasis on maybe us just looking to sort of play out from the back, maybe use the gaps that are a bit more out wide, not necessarily a lot through the middle. So I think that Johnny Yule will probably end up dropping deeper to sort of help with the build-up play. And then when we're on the attack, we'll essentially push up beside Pearman and it'll eventually transfer to a 4-3-3. But look, I think Ocon will do most of the defensive work, do most of the hard yards, the scrappy stuff, while Jalen Pearman just purely creates.
He's been brilliant for Perth Glory. It's been a surprise that it's taken him this long to get some game time.
Yeah, look, from what I've heard with Jalen, he's been really good in training all season with the Glory. He's had a really good relationship with Adam Taggart, as have a lot of the younger boys that have been making good impressions on the old guard, I guess you could say. But Jalen's one that's really stood out. It's a profile that we've sort of been missing at the Glory, I'd say, since Keegan Jelicic left. Look, I've sung Keegan's praises on a number of occasions, but he's very, very confident for a young player, which is what I like. He gets stuck into challenges. He presses really well. His defensive metrics actually really impressive, and especially the game against Newcastle on the weekend didn't have much of an opportunity to create, given that he was playing more out wide, but did really well in his defensive metrics up against Aquilina. So I was very happy to see that. In terms of other stuff, he's really good at picking out space. He does his best work when sort of just playing as a second striker, running underneath the other striker, using the space that's left him behind. That's why I feel he works so well with Taggart, as Taggart is a really intelligent forward who knows how to draw his man to him, and just profits off of all that extra space. So I expect him to do something similar with the Socceroos side. I think we can all agree the striker will probably be Jovanovic, but we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, Pearman I'm really excited about. Bulgaria as well, while I don't think he's as good of a player as Pearman, is pretty decent as well, is a natural 10 just like Pearman, so provides good cover off of the bench in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say I know too much about most of these players, unfortunately. But I think if you're talking about a 4-2-3-1, to me it sounds like we're probably going to be a bit cautious in attack. I don't know why. To me, that the whole idea of a 4-2 almost makes it seem like we've got 6 playing a defensive role. When you're only got one striker up front, you really need that striker to be able to be sure on the ball, hold it up well enough, and be making the right runs to be pulling players out of position. Looking at the attackers, so Dean Bosniak MacArthur, Luka Jovanovic Adelaide, Meden Mehmeti Melbourne City, Thiago Quintal Sydney, and Musa Toure from Clermont. Do we have a striker in there that can do that role? And then that way bringing the other players into the game to create those attacking phases?
Well, the scouting reports on Luka Jovanovic and Mehmeti are absolutely glowing. And I've really been impressed with them myself, looking at their technical qualities. In terms of how they work in a specific system, I think Jovanovic would be ideal if he was a second striker because he is quite creative and he isn't a striker that likes to absolutely lead the line. But he's doing very well this year, even though he's fighting it out with Archie Goodwin. He's actually the 4th best striker in the league for goals per 90 minutes. And if you cut out anyone if you have a minutes cutoff for people who are just getting lots of goals per minute because they've only got 1 goal and only played 10 minutes or whatever, then he's actually second in the league. So he's really been prolific and has a lot of experience. And Mehmeti, he has a real variety of shots. Yes, he very raw at the moment, but he's got a real variety of shots, able to find yards of space against a set defense. And what he's doing right now for his age is pretty incredible. Just his ability to get that little bit of space, ability to get a shot away really quickly, even if he's in an awkward body position. Whereas a lot of our players, they tend to try and wait until the perfect moment to get that shot away, or wait until they're on the preferred foot, or have a big backswing, take a few touches, set themselves. Whereas he is willing to just take that shot really quickly. So he's a bit raw. The other one to look at is Musa Toure. He's a striker that's been getting some minutes in France's League 2. Not a lot of minutes, but he is still a raw talent, which might be interesting to watch.
Yeah, Alex, if we're going 4-2-3-1, surely we picked one too many strikers who's just there for holiday. Someone's got to be there to, carry the water bottles, I guess. But do you think they're actually going to be playing?
No, I don't imagine so. Look, like I said, Jovanovic is going to be our guy to lead the line. I think that's pretty obvious. He's the only guy there that has, any sort of serious A-League experience. Mehmeti, I think, is a great young player. Just doesn't really have enough to lead the line over Jovanovic. Bosniak, I don't think will get many minutes at all, if any. Look, if I could pick an area of the squad that I'm concerned with, it would probably be the attack. The wingers, while there's a lot of promising youngsters, there's no real sort of players there that I just look at and just say, wow, this is a player that I'm ready to have in this team. I'm excited to have in this team. You've got Daniel Benny there. I'm assuming that the winger pairing is going to be Benny and Quintal. Quintal has been good, hasn't scored yet in the A-League for Sydney after making 10 appearances. But, you can't really judge a young winger off of that too much. Nathan Manatides, I was surprised that he didn't get picked in the squad whatsoever, as well as Brigetta from Brisbane. He's looked quite good. Surprised he didn't get picked over Rendazzo. Badalato, I think, is probably one of the most underrated youngsters in the A-League, so I'm excited to see him finally get his chance. And Musa Toure, obviously a lot of hype around him when he broke through the scene. Hasn't really been that much of a standout player in France, so hopefully this is a good opportunity for him to sort of kick on and, I guess, kickstart the next phase of his career. But obviously there's a few big names missing, Nesri Irankunda and Thomas Waddingham being the main ones in the attackers, as well as a few others that I really think could have added some quality, maybe Bailey Brantman. But look, I guess we're going to have to go with what we're given here. It's not exciting. There's not many sort of wow players in there, but I think it's a good enough front line to see us through our group quite comfortably. We're going to win a lot of those battles in the midfield, and we're going to need a large shift from Pierman and Johnny Yule and a lot of creativity from them and Jovanovic to be able to beat some of these low-blocking teams.
Yeah, I guess with poverty of fullbacks and having so many strikers in the squad, it looks like maybe we play a 3-4-3. We'll have to see what Trevor Morgan does. We could have 3 at the back, and then we can play Johnny Yule out wide. He's fast enough, and then perhaps play 3 of these strikers if we want to.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to touch on when you mentioned the Manatides. The only reason I can think he hasn't been selected is the Raw have kind of turned around and gone, no, you can't have him because of the transfer of Waddingham to Portsmouth. Like, it's a massive player to lose for the Raw. And they brought in Henry Hoare, but he's just only just come in or just come back to Brisbane after his loan at Gangwon. So he's still going to maybe have a slight adjustment period, and Zatkovic probably can't afford to lose too many games. So he's already released, 3 or 4 players? No, my maths is correct. No, just the one, just Harrington. All right, so looking ahead to the competition this year, we've got China, Kyrgyzstan, and I believe Qatar in our group. Where can we expect to finish and in this year's tournament?
Yeah, so I was looking at our squad this year compared to last time, and it looks slightly better than last time. It can be hard because often you look back at old squads and you've seen how they developed, and you're like, wow, those players look really, really good now. But you have to go back at the time. And so if I look at the number of minutes they got, the squad on average is getting roughly half the minutes per game as the squad today. And looking just at the A-League players, and if I just take a Frankenstein formation, just fitting the top 10 players and their FootMob ratings, there's the best 10, the best outfield today is slightly higher than it was 2 years ago. And 2 years ago was a pretty good tournament, even though we didn't qualify. We flogged Qatar 9-1. We beat Iran, one of the powerhouses of Asia, 3-2. We slipped on banana peel versus Vietnam. And even though we had more points and better goal difference, we ended up finishing second our group to Iran, which meant we had to play the tournament hosts, Uzbekistan, who ended up doing pretty well at the Youth World Cup. And we ended up drawing 1-1. And I remember thinking we really unlucky to lose that match, but we lost it in penalty shootouts. So we were really, really close last time. And this time I feel like we have a winnable group. And even if something goes wrong, we finish second. Japan and South Korea on the other side of the bracket. So for me, par has to be top 4 and qualification for the Youth World Cup.
Alex, agreeing? Is that acceptable? Or is your
Look, I think top 4 definitely is the aim. I really want us to make the Under-20s World Cup, please. I absolutely need it. We didn't make the Olympics, so I need to see something here. But in all seriousness, the group is winnable. It is very, very much winnable. We do have to get a good result here. Kyrgyzstan, we should be beating every day of the week. China, look, they normally do okay in these youth tournaments, but this feels like a good enough group. You know what I mean? I'd say strong enough. It's not really strong, but it's decent. You know what I mean? We've got quite a few of these boys playing professional football. And even though there are quite a few of them that aren't playing professional football yet, I do think that we've got enough depth here and enough quality on the side. I am quite worried about Qatar. They're on the up in terms of their youth football. But like Graham said, Japan and South Korea being on the other side of the bracket is absolutely huge. Obviously, if we can get through the group and get to the semis, that's probably the aim. I don't think the squad is good enough to win the whole tournament, just because I think we're lacking not depth, but quality depth in some areas. There are quite a few positions where if you take out a starter in that position and you sort of put in the guy underneath, you're like, oh, okay, that's a bit of a hit to the squad. You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily feel I'd be comfortable if I, took out someone like Jovanovic and put in Mehmeti or Bosniak. I don't think I'd be comfortable if I took out Hall and put in Alexander Robinson. I don't think I'd be comfortable if I took out Lijalajski and put in Taladera. So look, it's just something that we're going to have to deal with. I'm hoping semi-finals. That is my main hope. But in terms of winning the comp, I don't think we have enough for it this year.
Yeah, so I think even though we don't win it, what we want to see is progression. And considering last time we got knocked out in the quarterfinals, we would definitely want to see some sort of progression moving forward. Because like Graham was saying, you can look back at squads, and if we go back as far as like our best performance in 2010 when we were runners up, that was you look at the names on that paper and it's like, that's a decent squad. A lot of those players actually went on to have some sort of decent career, or in some cases a really good career. We clearly haven't done well since then. It's almost 15 years now. So we want to be seeing progression. You don't want to see a stagnation. And speaking of progression, Abdulkadir Khusanov recently signed with Man City. Now he would have been part of the Uzbeki squad who almost qualified for the Olympics, and such a high profile signing. He's the first Uzbeki player in the Premier League. Considering Uzbekistan also beat us at the last Under-20 tournament, do we think other Asian countries now are starting to potentially catch up or maybe get ahead of us in terms of their youth development?
Look, I'd say the pecking order is still pretty similar to what it's been in the last few years. Japan and South Korea just clear of the pack by a country mile. The investment that they get in their youth football, down to their infrastructure, down to their coaching, even having, a proper tiered professional football system is absolutely huge for them. So I think they're ahead of the curve and we're not going to be at their level for at least a couple of decades. But I wouldn't be too worried about Uzbekistan catching up to Australia in terms of facilities and stuff like that. But what I would be worried about is now that football is becoming more of a global game and global scout networks are increasing and there's more focus in, areas like Central or Southeast Asia, there are going to be instances where players from these countries like Uzbekistan, like China, like Qatar, like Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore are going to be, found before they're too old to sort of make that jump. And I've been saying for a while now that Uzbekistan, an underrated powerhouse, they always do really well in youth tournaments, but never really in the senior team. And that's because by the time they get to the senior team, the highest that their plders really ever get is Russian Premier League. But you look at it now, they have players playing in Belgium, obviously Abdulkadir Khusanov now in the Premier League, Eldor Shomurodov playing for Roma and Serie A. So there's plenty of players that are now starting to get that attention. And I think it's going to happen a lot more around Southeast Asia, Indonesia now having players playing in the Premier League as well as Serie A and possibly the Bundesliga now, given that I've heard reports that Michael Bakker, the left wing back from Leverkusen, is possibly going to declare his nationality. It's a tough one to say in terms of, are we falling behind? I think we are progressing, but I don't think we're doing enough to sort of provide these opportunities to these younger players. We're doing good in terms of our metrics for actually like giving them A-League starts and stuff like that. But I think the coaching has to improve. I want to see the AIS brought back so that we can actually focus on these supremely talented players and make sure that we're working closely with them, giving them all the physical, the emotional, the mental support that they need. And yeah, I think we'll be fine. I think we're closer to Japan and Korea than we are to Uzbekistan, which is a good thing. It's definitely a good thing. I'd say we're probably I'd say third or fourth, probably third best side in Asia when it comes to youth development behind Korea and Japan. So I think there's no sort of massive need to, panic to any degree. I do think, though, that other teams are making big steps to catch up and we need to follow suit and make sure that we're taking big steps.
Yeah, one thing which is really, really interesting to me is the fact that if you look at where players who don't play domestically against our Asian opponents, who are not your Japan, not your South Korea, you often see players playing for either the Big Five or back home in Asia, and pretty much nothing in between. You have Jordan, player from Montpellier. You have China, who has played many games in La Liga. And of course, this player from Uzbekistan, who's had good experience in France and now moved to the Premier League. That tells me that maybe scouts aren't seeing all these players, or maybe some of them are reluctant to travel. I don't know what the story is, but probably a lot of these players are good enough for the second tier in Europe, just aren't being scouted or aren't moving for whatever reason. And you often see we come across these Asian nations, and they may be ranked hundreds of the world, and we've been wondering for 15 years what's going on. They look technically pretty decent. They're hard to beat. They're hard to beat even with our golden generation. They looked really, really impressive. And probably what's happening there is we are much more willing to send our players not just to the Big Five, but the tiers below to develop that professionalism. And when our Socceroos come against them, we can still sneak past them more often than not because our players have had that experience in those cutthroat European leagues, even if they're not necessarily the Big Five.
But I want to just challenge that point a little bit because I kind of agree that, yes, maybe even the golden generation struggled a bit. I still think that comes down to the fact that they had Ani, who, when he was at his worst, and they were kind of at the twilight or at their best. So it was a bad sort of timing. But the reason I'm saying I want to challenge it there is because we've got a lot of players who moved to Europe, but not many of them, particularly in the recent years, not many of them have kind of made it to that next step and stayed in main team. So if you look at South Korea, for example, they've got like Son, they've got Kim Min-jae, Wang Hee-chan, Matoma, Tomiyasu, all these players who've made this move to Europe, but they've turned into first teamers or reliable players. So our players that are moving to Europe, are they making the move at the right age, or are they just not up to the standard? And is that something then that means we look back home as to how we're developing those players?
Look, if you want my thoughts on it, I think, look, it's a tough one. I think a lot of these decisions around the younger players moving, the FA especially should be taking a really close look at these and sort of studying like, okay, what is the best time for these players to move both physically and I guess technically as well? Because look, like we said, I'm pretty sure earlier in the episode, we produce a bunch of great athletic players, but technically we are behind, and a lot of, our young players don't gain that sort of technical prowess until they do move overseas. So it is something that needs to be looked at. I saw a report today as well that a partnership between RC Lens and Khusanov's agent, his agency, I guess, they basically struck a deal where they're going to pretty much scout Uzbekistan, and there's going to be opportunities for more Uzbekistani players to go directly from Uzbekistan to RC Lens, not have to go through, the whole process that Khusanov did, going and playing in Belarus and then moving to France from there. So, look, I wish we did see more of that from a lot of European sides. I think we will see more of it, especially if this whole program between RC Lens and Uzbekistan does really take off. But it's something, and it's some sort of initiative that I haven't really been aware of a lot of clubs actually doing. Obviously, you have clubs like PSV getting involved in Adelaide. You have clubs like Man City getting involved in Melbourne. But on a wider scale, there's not really too many examples I can point to where a big club is sort of going to a more obscure nation and, really planting their foot and saying, no, this is a country that we really want to be, scouring talent for. And I think that's something that's going to be important going forward. Back to the point on whether or not our young players are making the move at the right time, I think young Australian players are probably just as physically capable as some, top European talents physically. When it comes to technical ability, though, that's the struggle. So in my opinion, they do need to move. I think it's better in a large scale if they do move younger. The only reason I say that is because Australia has such a rich sporting culture that a lot of these kids have grown up playing sports their entire lives. They're physically capable, they're fit, they're ready, but a lot of them will sort of stick around, maybe get a few professional minutes here and there in the move when they're, 21 or 22. But by that point, a lot of clubs are sort of turning their heads because they're not incredibly young anymore. A lot of these kids need to be developed technically. Either we put a larger focus on technical development, and we can do that by doing stuff such as bringing back the AIC, or truly youth clubs and NPL clubs just have to put a larger emphasis, I guess, on technical development, and, kids that are aiming to go professional are just going to have to do most of their fitness training and physicality and whatever in their own time, because technicality is where we really fall behind compared to other countries.
So I want to give you a interesting quote from Hans Berger, the person who formed our national curriculum. He was working he used to work for clubs in the Netherlands, and he warned people about when you go over. He and I'm going to paraphrase here. He basically said, if you go over before you've played an A-League game or played a domestic game, then you're going through the full development pathway of that country. And the club is generally interested in you in a academy prospect. If you've gone after you've established yourself in a league and you're a proper player there, and then you're going over as someone who they're wanting to play in their first team from the start, they're generally interested in you. But if you're an in-between player, you've had a few games, you showed a few sparks of promise. He said on the other side, when he's working for these clubs, you often cast your wide net, getting maybe up to 20 players in the hope that one of them comes good, and you're not generally interested in those players. And if I have a look at the players who've done well in Europe over our entire history through NSL and the A-League era, they really do fit into those two categories of having played a few seasons here or having gone over before they played a game. And that's still true today. Those in the latter category, you can have Volpato, Robertson, and Sakati. Those in the former category, you of course have Aaron Moy, Matthew Leckie, Robbie Cruz, if you want to count him. Of course, he did his ACL. And the same was true back then with Harry Kewell and Tim Cahill. Looking back, those players who played maybe half a dozen games or whatever, your sort of Kwame Yeboah sort of profile, and then went over. There's not that many that have been successful. The only one I can find is Mark Bosnich. You could kind of maybe count Mark Bresciano, whose best season, he played 18 games in the A-League, and he played in the NSL, and 28 games overall. That's a pretty good, but probably lower than most people. Most people who went through the domestic pathway, they're usually debuting pretty early. They're usually first choice for the team by under 19. So in today's terms, that'd be someone born 2006. And they're usually leaving around under 21, under 22. So after 2 or 3 seasons of being first choice. So yeah, I was curious to hear your thoughts about Hans Berger's comments about if you're that in-between case where you've had a few games and then go over, that's a really dangerous time to move.
look, on a larger scale, I understand why he says that, but there's a couple of cases recently that are really sort of are going against that whole idea that you either have to move early or move a bit later, don't move in that middle stage. Look at Arieth Piel, for example, not a starter for MacArthur, mostly a bench player. And look, he's moved over at, I'd say, a decent time. He's just breaking into his teenage years. He started to get a few minutes, scored a couple goals, scored a really nice bicycle kick, obviously. But then he's just gotten his move to the MLS. Now, it's not the best move. I'm not, excited. I'm not overly, jumping at the idea of him playing in the MLS, especially when it was revealed that he had offers to go play for Troyes in France. But you look at other players as well. Oliver Jones, not really a pegged on, I guess more recently a pegged on starter for MacArthur, but not exactly an established A-League name. He's just gotten a move to Randers. So I think we're going against the grain more often than not now. There's a lot of players that are sort of moving in that middle stage. But I do think largely it is correct that players that move earlier get used to that European style of play earlier. But I also feel like they're the easiest ones to get lost in the shuffle, if you know what I mean. I feel like a player that sort of is an on and off starter, they're used to that sort of competitive nature because they're having to fight for their spot at their home club before they do move over. When you're a younger player coming through, I feel like it's easier for a lot of those players to sort of get lost in the shuffle. One that really sort of strikes at me is Josh Rawlins. Josh Rawlins, incredible talent coming out of Perth, 16, 17. He was probably one of the brightest prospects in the nation. Moves to the Netherlands, to Utrecht, doesn't really work out, and then he's back over here, and now he's in his early 20s and can't get a start for Melbourne Victory. Or you look at a player, for example, like Jacob Italiano, was a massive talent coming out of Perth, 16, 17 years old, big, hyped up talent, moves to Mönchengladbach, and I don't think he made one professional appearance for them in about 4 years of being there. So I'd say it is a risk going young, but I'd say it has both the biggest lows that you can possibly get and the biggest rewards that you can possibly get, in that the biggest lows being you don't play professional football that often and possibly don't even make it back in the A-League if you do come back over. But the biggest reward being that you are developed as a more sort of, I guess, used to the European style of game, the competitiveness, the sort of hunger to compete, more games, better coaching, and, obviously the fruits of our labor down that path. You see guys like Volpato, you see guys like Kachati, Robertson, even guys that haven't stepped foot on Australian soil before their, Socceroos debuts that go on to become some of our best players, such as Martin Boyle and Harry Suter. So I do think that he is right in the sense that moving young offers great reward and moving late offers great reward. But I almost feel like that middle ground, it's starting to be that a lot of players are moving in that middle ground. And I think that has to do with the fact that global scouting networks are now sort of starting to increase, where players aren't necessarily being picked up after being scouted at major youth tournaments or scouted after being a 3-year professional. They're now starting to reach that range where clubs are looking at them after 3-4 games and being like, okay, this is a player that we're definitely interested in. And I think that's honestly a good thing for the league overall.
In some cases, regardless of what's best for the player, there's also the question what's best for the club. And we are in a salary cap league, which means that it's very difficult to do for a lot of clubs to do what Adelaide have done, where they give 5-year contracts out. Because if you give a 5-year contract out to someone who ends up having an attitude problem and never really lifts off or has recurrent injuries and they just don't end up doing as well as you'd hope, that salary cap space of, say, $100,000 a year, whatever they're paid, that's taken up for many, many years, and also affects your future prospects as well. And so that's probably why we get in cases where some players are going on a free, some players, we have to sell them because there's only 6 months left. I know that Jed Drew and Tom Waddingham, they have 6 months left on their contract, and both their coaches, I believe, think that he'd be better off staying for another year so they could be guaranteed starter when they leave. So one of the elephants in the room is, even if what's best for the player is to leave at a certain time, we have to deal with the fact that the salary cap makes things very, very inflexible for clubs. I'm an advocate for changing to a luxury tax to get the same benefits of being an equal league. But if you do have to go over by $100,000 because you invested in someone who didn't come through and you want to invest in another player, then that's not going to be a killer. But yeah, I want to hear some of your thoughts about like some of these players where really the moves seem to be forced by the fact that they have to go because they only got 6 months left on their contract.
If you've got 6 months left on your contract and there's a European club that's sniffing around or showing some interest, your head's going to be turned by that. And so the A-League clubs have to kind of go, do we try to keep them here or do we just go, yep, let them go to Europe? There's not much more we can offer. Like there's an acceptance that we are at a lower league, we're at a lower level. If the kid's is interested by this move, let them go. And I think it also comes down to sometimes it doesn't matter how much you talk to someone. If you feel they're not ready, if someone's out there giving them an offer to come to Europe, they're just going to take it because it's like, when will I get this opportunity again? Or will I ever get this opportunity again? That kind of thing. Let's be honest, everyone who's growing up playing football in Australia is not growing up playing football going, I'm playing because I want to make it to the A-League and that's it. I want to stop. I mean, there's obviously a limit to what they can actually achieve. And at some point they go, right, okay, A-League is my ceiling. I can't go higher than that. But no one's growing up thinking that. No one's growing up thinking, I just want to play at the Raw or the Glory or Sydney FC or Western Sydney and stay there for the rest of my career. So the move to Europe has to be made, particularly if you want to compete with other nations because their players are doing the same thing. They're playing at higher levels. It comes down to when's the right time for that move. And sometimes that right time might not be at the age of 17, 18, if we are not if they're not physically or technically ready to step up. It might be at a later age, but every player is different in that sense.
I think there needs to be a bigger emphasis as well on sort of rewarding clubs and more promoting the A-League clubs to become sort of selling clubs, because I agree with Graham in the fact that we do need to revamp the whole salary cap. I've been a big advocate of rewarding clubs that raise money through transfer fees, whether that means they get maybe extra salary cap space or extra increased funding or stuff like that. I do think it should be kept equal. So I do think that if clubs do raise money through transfers, they should be rewarded with some extra salary cap space, in my opinion. But look, that's the future of the league that I see as sort of our clubs becoming more selling clubs. And look, once the domestic transfer system gets bought in and we're able to see A-League clubs having to pay transfer fees, look, I truly believe that that's going to be sort of the peak of the money-making situations for the clubs. It's going to reward them bringing young players through. It's going to reward them putting them on bigger contracts. And it's going to make European leagues respect us more in sort of the fees that they're able to get our players for. I really think that that has positives. Obviously, you can run the risk of European clubs turning their heads because they don't want to pay this much for a player coming through Australia. But we've got to remember that the salary cap, in large, is damaging to this league in terms of our Asian coefficient, in terms to how good our league is actually competing in Asia. Lots of the teams that we're running up to in Asia, we have maybe, 2 or 3 aging visas, and then the rest are made up of academy products. And when you compare it to these leagues in Asia, such as Japan or Saudi Arabia even, where they're able to pay these experienced names a lot of money to go play in their leagues, there's not a lot of ways that we can compete with that. And if the FA seriously does want to compete with that, we do need to reconsider how we're approaching building these squads going into Asian competitions. It's
a very valid point, because when we look at all our transfers that have gone out of the A-League recently, I think that the most expensive one, or the highest one, was Kunda, which was roughly about 3 million. We're not really going to be getting that kind of fee for players purely because of our salary cap and the way our league is structured. So Kunda's moved to Bayern Munich. He's played in their second team, then had a few call-ups into their first team, but not really played, and now he's on loan to Grasshopper. It's all happened within the space of one season. They've obviously invested a lot in him for what they consider, but now we then have to look at it again and go, well, what's the situation? Maybe perhaps, like you mentioned previously, Alex, it's a mentality thing, or maybe our players are just not technically set up to go there. So when you talk about the salary cap and you're talking about how the league is structured, definitely needs to be addressed, because I think it all ties in together. If the salary cap doesn't work, if the league structure doesn't work, then the players are not going to develop in the way they need to, and we're not going to be able to have the systems in place to produce talent to go overseas. We're getting such low transfer fees, clubs are not going to invest it all the way straight back into development. That's going to fall then on NPL clubs to do. But I think it's also the perfect situation where we go, all these players have moved across. We've got a lot of young talent in Australia. The next few years are going to be interesting and exciting to see what happens. I think, Graham, now that we've got the U20 World Cup coming up soon, we're going to see some of that talent on show. Perhaps there's a bit more cause for optimism in that a lot of these players that are going to Europe will be successful.
Oh, absolutely. I remember, I can tell you in the New Dawn, the first people I remember who went to Europe and immediately were first choice for their starting 11 Those were in the Swiss League, Oliver Bozanovic and Dario Vidicic. That was about 10 years ago. And so people didn't realize how hard it was back then. Of course, this was Vidicic's second spell. He tried, and he had an unsuccessful spell in the Bundesliga. And that felt like such a breakthrough. But now it feels like it's more often than not that people are going straight into the starting 11, holding down their spot. Even if they lose it, they tend to come back. There's not that many who go to that Europe second tier and completely get lost these days if they've had some A-League experience. So it's clearly that there's been vast improvement. And I think probably about a quarter of those, you would hope, would eventually just exceed expectations and go to another level. So I'm really hoping that if we are sending players over at this rate, which looks like we're probably going to go to about 1 per club. So there's 11 Australian clubs. So hopefully around about 11 a year. Then hopefully eventually it's only about 5 or 6 years before we'd see full Australian teams, full of players which are playing regularly in the Big Five. That's my hope. Of course, we've had hope before, and hope can feel like a foolish thing for an Australian football fan to have. But in the end, there does seem to be some really, really, really exciting green shoots on the horizon. And it'll be really fascinating to see if we see any evidence of that in the Under-20 Australian Cup.
Before we finish up and wrap up everything, that's one player from that Under-20 World Cup we're looking forward to seeing. Just a quick name and one quick reason why as to who that player is going to be, the one that's going to stand out for us.
Pearman, because he's the number 10. And I think we've produced a lot of great number 8s. There's so many talented central midfielders out there who are technically neat, but we need our number 10s.
Number 10s. Alex?
I was really hoping you weren't going to say Pearman there, by the way, because that was going to be my shout.
That's why I jumped in quickly.
You can have the same player.
Nah, that's boring. I've got to give someone else now. Maybe not necessarily one. I think Zach Luzalaski will surprise a lot of people, but outside of that, I'm really looking forward to seeing both this double pivot. What I'm expecting will be a double pivot of Yule and Ocon Jr., and also the centre back pairing of Kikianis and Esposito. I'm looking forward to seeing how those 4 players sort of interact with each other and how they control the game for us. I think they're going to be huge if we're looking to get into the semi-finals and get that qualification for the World Cup. And yeah, hopefully they can smash it.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, it's been another amazing chat, gentlemen. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and we've got heaps more coming up. So remember to get onto that forum, greenandgoldfc.com. Get your thoughts in on what we've spoken about, whether you disagree with myself, Alex, Graham, or you agree with us, or you want one of us to shut up more or talk more. By all means, jump in there, let us know, and let's keep the conversation going. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next pod. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.